Hello. Today I'm going to read some more of When We Were Very Young by A. Milne and decorations by Ernest H. Shepard. The Island. If I had a ship, I'd sail my ship. I'd sail my ship through eastern seas, down to a beach where the slow waves thunder, the green curls over and the white falls under. Boom, boom, boom on the sun-bright sand. Then I'd leave my ship and I'd land and climb the steep white sand and climb to the trees, the 6 dark trees, the coconut trees on the cliff's green crown, hands and knees to the coconut trees, face to the cliff as the stones patter down, up, 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 staggering, stumbling, round the corner where the rock is crumbling, round this shoulder, over this boulder, up to the top where the 6 trees stand. And there would I rest and lie, my chin in my hands, and gaze at the dazzle of sand below, and the green waves curling slow, and the gray-blue distant haze where the sea goes up to the sky. And I'd say to myself as I looked so lazily down at the sea, there's nobody else in the world, and the world was made for me. The 3 Foxes. Once upon a time, there were 3 little foxes who didn't wear stockings and they didn't wear sockses, but they all had handkerchiefs to blow their noses, and they kept their handkerchiefs in cardboard boxes. They lived in the forest in 3 little houses, and they didn't wear coats and they didn't wear trousies. They ran through the woods on their little bare tootsies, and they played touch last with a family of mouses. They didn't go shopping in the high street shopses, but caught what they wanted in the woods and copses. They all went fishing, and they caught 3 wormses. They went out hunting, and they caught 3 whoopses. I don't know what all those things are. They went to a fair, and they all won prizes, 3 plum puddingses and 3 mince pieses. They rode on elephants and swang on swingses, and hit 3 coconuts at coconut cheeses. That's all that I know of the 3 little foxes who kept their handkerchiefs in cardboard boxes. They lived in the forest in 3 little houses, but they didn't wear coats and they didn't wear trousies, and they didn't wear stockings and they didn't wear sockses. It's a fun poem. You can make up words for your poems to make things rhyme better. Politeness. If people ask me, I always tell them, "Quite well, thank you, I'm very glad to say." If people ask me, I always answer, "Quite well, thank you, how are you today?" I always answer, I always tell them if they ask me politely, but sometimes I wish that they wouldn't. Jonathan Joe. Jonathan Joe has a mouth like an O and a wheelbarrow full of surprises. If you ask for a bat or for something like that, he has got it, whatever the size is. If you're wanting a ball, it's no trouble at all. Why, the more that you ask for, the merrier. Like a hoop and a top and a watch that won't stop, and some sweets and an Aberdeen Terrier. Jonathan Joe has a mouth like an O, but this is what makes him so funny. If you give him a smile only once in a while, then he never expects any money. Looks like a nice guy, nice old guy. At the zoo. There are lions and roaring tigers and enormous camels and things. There are buffalo bisons and a great big bear with wings. There's a sort of a tiny potamus and a tiny rhinoceros too. But I gave buns to the elephant when I went down to the zoo. There are badgers and bidgers and bodgers and a superintendent's house. There are masses of goats and a polar and different kinds of mouse. And I think there's a sort of a something which is called a wallaboo, but I gave buns to the elephant when I went down to the zoo. If you try to talk to the bison, he never quite understands. You can't shake hands with a Mingo. He doesn't like shaking hands. And lions and roaring tigers hate saying, "How do you do?" But I give buns to the elephant when I go down to the zoo. You ever been to a zoo? It's so much fun. Rice pudding. What is the matter with Mary Jane? She's crying with all her might and main, and she won't eat her dinner, rice pudding, again. What is the matter with Mary Jane? What is the matter with Mary Jane? I've promised her dolls and a daisy chain and a book about animals, all in vain. What is the matter with Mary Jane? What is the matter with Mary Jane? She's perfectly well and she hasn't a pain. But look at her, now she's beginning again. What is the matter with Mary Jane? What is the matter with Mary Jane? I've promised her sweets and a ride in the train, and I've begged her to stop for a bit and explain. What is the matter with Mary Jane? What is the matter with Mary Jane? She's perfectly well and she hasn't a pain, and it's lovely rice pudding for dinner again. What is the matter with Mary Jane? Maybe she doesn't like rice pudding, huh? Missing. Has anybody seen my mouse? I opened his box for half a minute just to make sure he was really in it. And while I was looking, he jumped outside. I tried to catch him. I tried. I think he's somewhere about the house. Has anyone seen my mouse? Uncle John, have you seen my mouse? Just a small sort of mouse, a dear little brown one. He came from the country. He wasn't a town one. So he'll feel all lonely in a London street. Why, what could he possibly find to eat? He might be somewhere. He must be somewhere. I'll ask Aunt Rose. Have you seen a mouse with a woofly nose? Oh, somewhere about. He's just got out. Hasn't anybody seen my mouse? That's really sad when you lose a little pet like that in your house. It's hard to find them. They're so small. The King's Breakfast. The king asked the queen, and the queen asked the dairymaid, could we have some butter for the royal slice of bread? The queen asked the dairymaid. The dairymaid said, certainly, I'll go and tell the cow now before she goes to bed. The dairymaid, she curtsied and went and sold the Alderney, don't forget the butter for the royal slice of bread, went and told the Alderney. The Alderney said sleepily, you'd better tell His Majesty that many people nowadays like marmalade instead. The dairymaid said, fancy, and went to Her Majesty. She curtsied to the Queen, and she turned a little red. Excuse me, Your Majesty, for taking of the liberty, but marmalade is tasty if it's very thickly spread. The Queen said, oh, and went to His Majesty. Talking of the butter for the royal slice of bread, many people think that marmalade is nicer. Would you like to try a little marmalade instead? What do you think the King's going to say? The King said, bother, and then he said, oh dear me. The King sobbed, oh dearie me, and went back to bed. Nobody, he whimpered, could call me a fussy man. I only want a little bit of butter for my bread. The Queen said, there, there, and went to the dairymaid. The dairymaid said, there, there, and went to the shed. The cow said, there, there. I didn't really mean it. Here's milk for his porridges and butter for his bread. The Queen took the butter and brought it to His Majesty. The King said, butter, eh? And bounced out of bed. Nobody, he said, as he kissed her tenderly. Nobody, he said, as he slid down the banisters. Nobody, my darling, could call me a fussy man, but I do like a little bit of butter to my bread. Hoppity. Christopher Robin goes hoppity, 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 hop. Whenever I tell him politely to stop it, he says he can't possibly stop. If he stopped hopping, he couldn't go anywhere. Poor little Christopher couldn't go anywhere. That's why he always goes hoppity, 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 hop. At home. I want a soldier in a busby. I want a soldier to come and play with me. I'd give him cream cakes, big ones, sugar ones. I'd give him cream cakes and cream for his tea. I want a soldier, a tall one, a red one. I want a soldier who plays on the drum. Daddy's going to get one. He's written to the shopman. Daddy's going to get one as soon as he can come. Wrong house. I went into a house, and it wasn't a house. It has big steps and a great big hall, but it hasn't got a garden, a garden, a garden. It isn't like a house at all. I went into a house, and it wasn't a house. It has a big garden and a great high wall, but it hasn't got a may tree, a may tree, a may tree. It isn't like a house at all. I went into a house, and it wasn't a house. Slow white petals from the may tree fall, but it hasn't got a blackbird, a blackbird, a blackbird. It isn't like a house at all. I went into a house, and I thought it was a house. I could hear from the may tree the blackbird call, but nobody listened to it. Nobody liked it. Nobody wanted it at all. Summer afternoon. 6 brown cows walked down to drink. All the little fishes blew bubbles at the mayfly. Splash goes the first as he comes to the brink. Swish go the tails of the 5 who follow. 12 brown cows been drinking there. All the little fishes went waggle tail, 6 from the water and 6 from the air. Up and down the river darts a blue-black swallow. Sounds like fun. Watching the cows and the fish and the birds. The Dormouse and the Doctor. There once was a dormouse who lived in a bed of delphiniums blue and geraniums red, and all the day long he'd a wonderful view of geraniums red and delphiniums blue. The doctor came hurrying round, and he said, "Tut, tut, I am sorry to find you in bed. Just say 99 while I look at your chest. Don't you find that chrysanthemums answer the best?" The Dormouse looked round at the view and replied, when he'd said 99, that he'd tried and he'd tried. And much the most answering things that he knew were geraniums red and delphiniums blue. The doctor stood frowning and shaking his head, and he took up his shiny silk hat as he said, "What the patient requires is a change," and he went to see some chrysanthemum people in Kent. The Dormouse lay there, and he gazed at the view of geraniums red and delphiniums blue, and he knew there was nothing he wanted instead of delphiniums blue and geraniums red. The doctor came back, and to show what he meant, he had brought some chrysanthemum cuttings from Kent. "Now these," he remarked, "give a much better view than geraniums red and delphiniums blue." They took out their spades and they dug up the bed of delphiniums blue and geraniums red, and they planted chrysanthemums, yellow and white. "And now," said the doctor, "we'll soon have you right." The Dormouse looked out, and he said with a sigh, "I suppose all these people know better than I. It was silly, perhaps, but I did like the view of geraniums red and delphiniums blue." The doctor came round and examined his chest and ordered him nourishment, tonics, and rest. "How very effective," he said as he shook the thermometer. All these chrysanthemums look." The Dormouse turned over to shut out the sight of the endless chrysanthemums, yellow and white. How lovely, he thought, to be back in a bed of delphiniums blue and geraniums red. The doctor said, "Tut, it's another attack," and ordered him milk and massage of the back, and freedom from worry and drives in a car, and murmured, "How sweet your chrysanthemums are." The Dormouse lay there with his paws to his eyes, and imagined himself such a pleasant surprise. "I'll pretend the chrysanthemums turned to a bed of delphiniums blue and geraniums red." The doctor next morning was rubbing his hands and saying, "There's nobody quite understands these cases as I do. The cure has begun. How fresh the chrysanthemums look in the sun." The Dormouse lay happy. His eyes were so tight he could see no chrysanthemums, yellow or white, and all that he felt at the back of his head were delphiniums blue and geraniums red. And that is the reason, Aunt Emily said, if a dormouse gets in a chrysanthemum bed, you'll find, so Aunt Emily says, that he lies fast asleep on his front with his paws to his eyes. That's cute. Okay, I'm going to stop there because this is a big book. I'll do another section next. Hope you liked it.